Now, the benefit of being the only eatery in the Nexus Station food court is that you become quite skilled at maintaining a straight expression while viewing a 7-foot pure Vexa fighter, muscle, and battle-hardened carapace, sobbing real tears as they consume what any child would consider a mild chicken. What kind of chemical warfare is this the warriors curried by the sacred moons? As he grabbed for his 4th glass of milk, his mandibles trembled. Fun fact, who knew that milk is the all-purpose remedy for spice? It's simply turmeric and a little bit of "I cleaned the counter with dry powder" friend, trying not to smile too widely. It's a typical Earth fare, so you should. The Vexer compound's eyes widened when they saw what we cooked when we were genuinely attempting to prepare something hot. "Oh no, there are stronger varieties," I pointed to the empty menu, which is essentially baby food where I'm from, quickly ran from his chair. Wanting to try the vindaloo hovering above the counter fell, adding to the tiny number of furniture casualties my restaurant had reported this week alone. Investing in more durable chairs was necessary. Welcome to Morrison's Earth Eats, the most contentious business in the largest shopping center this side of the Orion Arm. I'm Jack Morrison, a dedicated steward of the culinary heritage of humanity, and at least 3 separate galactic regulatory authorities have reportedly identified a possible biological terrorist. The Nexus Station food court is a huge area with hundreds of restaurants that takes up a full deck at the station. The typical Zentan protein cubes that symbolize cuisine from all over the galaxy are metamorphic crystalline kinds of nutrients, and even a good Jovian gas suspension bar, but might tiny. In a way, the gastronomic mayhem has turned into a tourist attraction. Similar to locations on Earth where people travel to eat ghost peppers, black pepper is regarded as tough here. Speaking of regulars, Jack is my favorite person to give out controlled substances. Welcome to Ambassador Bohr, my best client. Add the first extraterrestrial I've encountered who has truly come to value human food as a gelatinous life shape, most likely aids only chemical receptors that somehow interpret, not taste buds in the conventional sense. Ambassador, I was already enjoying capsaicin as usual, prior to his pseudopods completely settling into his personalized seat. He reached for the ingredients. Please find that delightful. The scarlet powder in the dish you call mac and cheese caused his translucent shape to ripple. I started the water to boil in anticipation of buffalo macaroni and cheese. How is it going? A diplomatic dispute over the darkened form of the silicon consciousness. They continue to insist that biological life is somewhat suboptimal, which is the equivalent of a scowl, fundamentally ineffective and ought to be converted to digital format, which I attempted in playing a cultural exchange, but he was cut off by a 3-figure disturbance at the food court door. Scanning gadgets in front of the lunch throng while wearing immaculate white environmental suits. Shields from the Galactic Food Safety Administration, for example, right on time for their weekly attempt to silence Mio, I moaned as I sprinkled the cayenne pepper into the cheese sauce, maybe a little more forcefully then. Perhaps the food police are back. And the blur's form is compressed in a worried manner. I should have mentioned that some of those bottled fluids might have been involved in an incident in the Galactic Senate. I froze while stirring when you handed me the one with the hot sauce label. Tell me that you didn't bring the ghost pepper sauce to a Senate meeting, please, Boro. For someone without a set facial expression, the ambassador's ability to appear both remorseful and amused is rather remarkable. Tell me that you didn't bring the ghost pepper sauce to a Senate meeting, please, Poro. For someone else, a set facial expression. The ambassador's ability to bring the ghost pepper sauce to a Senate meeting, please, Boro. For someone without a set facial expression, there is a much better preference for ramen callies. They demanded to feel like real people. Through diplomacy, the GFS inspectors were already approaching their scanners. I looked at my spice rack, which was lovingly filled with everything, and it was blaring menacingly from the six-part galaxy, right along with things like Soviet salad suffering, which my great-grandfather would love. Oh, and served with things that looked like ETF's comical weapons, or if it would simply be another today would be the day that ketchup was finally classified as a chemical weapon, or if it would simply be another typical when lunch was served at the chemical weapon. The lead inspector's scanner began to complain. I couldn't forget the first time I saw Zishi twitch as she entered my kitchen. Chef Morrison's antenna is an 8-foot-tall mantis wearing a hazmat suit and treating oregano like weapons-grade plutonium. Our sensors picked up a tracer of Capsis from 3 decks away when she twitched beneath her face shield. I pointed to the buffalo mac and cheese that was now obligingly simmering on the stove while I was preparing lunch. Ambassador, the 2 junior inspectors were sitting at the counter when Blur's translucent figure jiggled with barely restrained amusement. They started up in surprise, then went down again when they realized the sight I had claimed. They grimaced and gave me a look over their shoulder. Paragraph 9 of the Galactic Regulations states that no food establishments may provide chemicals with protective molecular structures without the necessary. I objected to safety procedures and warning labels because it's just hot sauce, and people have been consuming it for. Indeed, Zix's mandibles clicked thousands of years ago, and Id discovered that she was 75% better off with complete cellular retirement than that of a famed human ability to absorb cellular material is the equivalent of a condescending smirk. Tell me, Chef Morrison, are you aware that a degrading agent for pleasure? She checked her scanner for a single drop of this, and Dave's insanity source has it would take a lot of capsaicin to render a medium-sized kraken inoperable. I'll need to test it on a large kraken at some point because of your species' cavalier attitude. Warfare is not amusing, she said, gesturing to one of her. The junior inspector, whose outer suit is scanned by subordinates in the storage area, was a little too large for its arthropod body, and as it crawled in the direction of my pantry, I got a bead of sweat on my forehead, but it had nothing to do with the steam coming from the kitchen, Pastor. So going back upstairs, would you also go to the top of the cabinet below your footprints and reach behind 2 crates, one of them stored food, and the other items that could only have come through the kitchen, and move things like I bookended it and basically stalled the system. So the junior inspector's several guests in the vicinity ducked under their tables as the scanner abruptly flared up like a Christmas tree and began to yell. Zex moved more quickly when a Class 7 psychoactive stimulant was discovered. Her mandibles expand in alarm. Class 7, which is more than I've ever seen her move. She stopped dead in her tracks when she realized that nothing higher than Class 3 is allowed on civilian stations. The inspector's innocent-looking bag, which he had just removed from beneath my spare flower, had compound eyes, containers for my meticulously concealed, very illicit, and costly coffee hoard. It's quite difficult to operate a restaurant during breakfast hours without beans, I remarked weakly in defense. Zeke Styx's voice rose to a pitch I didn't believe was conceivable for caffeinated coffee. Do you know when coffee was last traded lawfully in this area, insectoid, for fair distribution rights? Sector 3 Solar Systems, launched Warboro, nicely pointed out that this was more a result of inadequate negotiating strategies than the coffee itself, assisting in blocking the station's security alarm system, which was most likely activated by the scanner at that very moment. Red lights started to flash while a soothing AI voice issued a warning. Please walk calmly to the closest decontamination chamber. as a banned chemical was found in Food Court Section 7. Is not a drill, warning that customers were running away from banned substances. In all, dissolved in fear as a bunch of plutonian gas breathers ignited him. The only people who appeared unconcerned were a group of young Andromedans who had recently learned to love sriracha and were too preoccupied with their initial endorphin surge to consider the possibility of disapproval. Consequently, this establishment has been placed under quarantine until a thorough investigation is completed. ZX had previously sealed off Chef Morrison's antenna, is literally vibrating with bureaucratic joy as force fields are blasted into my kitchen. You shall turn in all narcotics classified as Class 3 or higher for prompt confiscation and disposal. After months of meticulous gathering, I took a look at my spice rack, trading and, yes, smuggling, occasionally, at my coffee cache, which came at a price finical at the now cold Buffalo. I gave a cheerful shipping captain 3 months' worth of money and a slightly unlawful favor. The whole situation was caused by mac and cheese. What if I cautiously mentioned an idea? What if I could demonstrate that none of these components are truly harmful and aren't weapons? Taste enhancers. Zigtai's jaws clicked doubtfully. And how precisely? Would you suggest showing how the ambassador's form abruptly blurred? Brightened with comprehension? Oh, this is going to be good, he said, turning to face Cyrus. As a diplomatic representative, I kindly ask Zizatix Inspector to Section 12 of the Galactic Cultural Preservation Act grants Chef Morrison the authority to demonstrate cultural exchange, right, to demonstrate that these are not restricted, but rather traditional cultural artifacts, chemicals, and I could almost feel Zizai digesting this as her compound eyes flickered, while she spoke with regulatory databases through her neural implants, which would necessitate important safety procedures and an official testing panel. I smiled, looking at the volunteers, and I knew exactly where to look. How about we arrange a small meal for the Andromedan teenagers, who were now arm wrestling over the remaining sriracha? Ambassador Blur was describing his gelatinous appearance, but you don't grasp it. With diplomatic zeal, this is about more than just a single eatery, is about the interchange of cultures across species. We were in the administrative offices of the station, where Blue was trying to discuss my situation with the regional director of the Galactic Food SA Administration. Cal was a crystalline being whose facets continued to turn a frightening shade of crimson as the discussion carried on with Sistel's cultural interchange. Ambassador, I must remind you of the historic wasabi incident. My voice resonated like shattered glass, and I winced at no one. Was intended to discuss the historic wasabi event, which was entirely different. BL objected, but a faint clouding in his normally clear shape indicated otherwise. Was it a holographic recording that Kazal showed that made me yearn? 3 cycles ago, the Galactic Senate had a floor that I could sink through, chamber. The video captured a younger, somewhat more translucent Blur excitedly describing what he dubbed a customary human diplomatic connection with the Respiratory Committee of the Senate, the turmoil that ensued when 17 senior officials using gill-based breathing systems simultaneously learned about the wasabi's ability to cleanse the nose had almost sparked 3 wars and a religious movement in my favor. Specifically, I marked the wasabi container with a caution not to. The crystalline form of Sistel, which you named the gill-breathing species, vibrated with the universal translator was unavailable for maintenance, yet the point is made clearly, disrupted that episode, which demonstrates our argument to those senators. Request wasabi in particular at every diplomatic event. It has become a prestige symbol that demonstrates one's human speech. I believe you mean intestinal fortitude and gut courage, which I generously provided. Intestinal strength. Cal's hue changed to a doubtful purple, which in some way explains why our busiest location still has a class-restricted drug dispensary. I fixed a restaurant in the commercial sector, and everything I serve is technically okay. Even the coffee that comes in 3 different varieties is categorized as nourishment. Have you witnessed human office workers consuming a stimulant of military quality before their daily coffee? Believe me, it's averting violence rather than making it vibrate a little. Through Sistel's form, which I discovered was their way of letting out a lengthy sigh, the rules are unambiguous without definition. In fact, appropriate containment and certification procedures actually disrupted his form abruptly, assuming the specific density he had set aside for legal arguments under the conventional galactic code. 359D standard. Containment procedures may not apply to cultural preparations made for demonstrated cultural importance. And I've got a pseudopod that generated some data here. Crystal 17 endorsements from different diplomatic embassies about the... I gazed at him as I considered the cultural significance of Earth food in interplanetary relations. When did you acquire those? I knew this day would arrive in a blur following the Sriracha summit last cycle, so I had them ready. Did you know that the High Council of Andromeda now views the capacity to eat human food as a rite of passage for the crystalline structure of their diplomatic core crystal as they evaluated this information? They went through a convoluted sequence of hue changes before deciding on a happier even T. Even if we agree with this cultural importance argument, bureaucratic beige would require a formal demonstration under controlled circumstances with professional observers and safety procedures completed, I stated. I'll have a demonstration meal shortly to show that human food is not only safe, but also vital to the galactic, Blore added. Did you realize that human food is Sistala's points are the only known material that may cause Xenil to feel emotion? And Angles somehow succeeded in expressing a profound sense of distrust when you see the testing panel would need to comprise representatives from a minimum of 5 distinct biological categories, such as species with verified sensitivity to terrain compounds? I smiled. I promise you precisely who to invite. And you'll need to show that you've made several preparations. Make a comprehensive tasting menu to highlight the whole spectrum of human everything, including the cuisine. Needs to be recorded, scanned, and examined for safety procedures. I'll even let you set up surveillance equipment in my kitchen. But I should warn you about the final 3. When I made Curry Castal vibrate in resignation, sets of sensors melted. You have precisely 1 rotation to support your argument, and if you are unable to show the decision to support your argument, and if you are unable to show that, you will be deported back due to the cultural relevance and safety of your preparations to Earth space, and this station will undergo a brief calculation that will sanitize it down to the molecular level, and by 36 Earth hours later, 35.7% of the blur was fixed, giving you plenty of time to arrange a molecular conception of the value of your preparation, and 37.7% of the blur was fixed, giving you plenty of time to arrange a future grains of Big Daddies as we sail away from Weldon. The dinner party will preserve human gastronomy in this area offices went to in order to obfuscate those 17 testimonials I don't think exist, and his body wavered in what could have been a shrug. They will, and by the time someone asks to view them, I have some requests for favors, but it would be beneficial if you could send a few care gifts to specific diplomatic posts, implying that I use illegal drugs to pay officials, not just that we make sure important decision makers understand the cultural context of the issues at hand. He turned to his most optimistic spirit. Regarding this demonstration supper, diplomatic density, I considered my spice cabinet, my well-chosen assortment of Earth ingredients, and all the dishes I'd modified in recent years to accommodate alien physiologies, yes, if they so choose. I'll show them what human food is truly capable of. But first, we must find and locate volunteers who are insane enough to consume it. Any adventure diplomat's blurred form should be darkened. Cunningly, Chef Morrison, you'd be shocked at how many creatures strive to show that they're more resilient than people. Shall we? I've already clenched my knuckles arranging the menu, so let's go recruitment shopping and create some impoverished lives. Cooking for aliens requires you to reinvent almost every recipe that has ever been made. The most perplexing idea to the rest of the galaxy is that humans evaluate food based on its flavor and texture. When aliens consider food in terms of spiciness, would this eliminate my main intestinal membrane, and is this regarded by law as an act of war? Which is the reason I was attempting to clarify the idea of spice tolerance to a bewildered gathering of. I said right away that volunteer taste testers view it as developing an immunity to poison, regretting the words I said because a number of creatures flinched in horror at what the term culinarily challenged refers to the seamless blurring of human. Gendral Laboratory in Canada, the patrons of Faithful Act, took the time to ensure that the subsequent granting pact must refer to the seamless blurring of human-developed liability waivers in the plutonium radiation zone, just to turn on the stove. There were more warning indicators than in a supernova, and the GFS had adequate scanning equipment in place to examine one. A had to sign 17 separate liability waivers in the plutonium radiation zone just to turn on the stove. My volunteer panel was a true galactic society who's who. They were all certain they could eat whatever meager human food I tossed at them. General Zor, a member of the Vexor military, had not yet recovered, weeping over curries last week. The silicon consciousness lady Crystalline insisted on eating, even though she didn't take it part for computational completeness. Along with a few more entities that ranged from energy types to, we'll start with something, so I held up a tiny black pepper shaker. Quantum probabilistic entities. Basically, the moment a Class 2 defensive substance was recognized, every scanner in the kitchen went into overdrive. Present Zix-Tix, who was using a portable force field to oversee the test, nervously clicked her mandibles. Maybe we could start with a less forceful approach? I glanced at my meticulously prepared tasting menu before turning to face the growing number of terrified faces and probability clouds. Let's begin with rice, shall we, ladies? And energy matrices all over my kitchen. Through her translation, Crystal's voice chimed, surely these cannot be the well-known human carbohydrate chains. Be risky, so I chose not to bring up the availability of spicy rice meals. I discovered that the following few hours were a crash education in alien gastronomic psychology. Most species seem to find things that humans find dull to be excitingly tasty. 3 distinct critics found plain white rice to be daringly textured. A quantum being who had never had yeast-based bread had a small religious experience with a simple bread roll. And they flickered in several probability states before becoming intriguing. The proteins have undergone controlled breakdown and chemical modification at the same time, but they are still safe for humans. Humans are really crazy scientists when it comes to eating. I mumbled, it's only bread, but noted that in the future, Ambassador Blore, I should market my sourdough starter as a controlled breakdown culture. Every time someone became overly anxious about a situation, his gelatinous heart had been operating interference all day. He would easily show that a certain element was safe by incorporating it into his mass. Yet even he drew the conclusion when I proposed trying the ghost pepper sauce. I might have been your friend, Chef Morrison. However, I'm not suicidal. The true difficulty was creating a menu that would highlight real human tastes without creating a diplomatic complication. This has to be before the demonstration dinner. Each dish required 3 separate warning labels, which were recorded, examined, and authorized. Haha, what about this one? General Zor pointed at my test menu with one of the safety warnings from a little fiction black bean soup with armored claws. I looked at his species' dietary constraints. Perhaps they aren't yours, since his species reacts explosively to Liger's explosion, as in the last time a Vexer tried beans, causing a deck hull breach. 7. He swiftly shifted his claw to another object, and by the time our test was over, I had a menu that I believed could develop recipes that would go beyond chemical warfare to demonstrate that human food was more than just food. I told my family that I hoped there wouldn't be any evacuation-level incidents tomorrow. Using a panel of volunteers who were a little astonished, we demonstrated that human cuisine is worthy of being in the galaxy. Not only is our food healthy, but it's also an adventure worth going on, one that won't really murder us, Lady Christina said, but I halted. Hopefully not. Perhaps avoid the Vinda BL, as the volunteers are seeking for much more anxious than when they had first arrived, but Bohr stayed to assist me. Prepare, as he mentioned, by carefully weighing spices in accordance with the recently established safety procedures, and the diplomatic corps is having a betting pool over tomorrow's meal. Oh, I began preparing marinades for every container. Presently, more warning labels are needed than for a nuclear reactor. What are the odds of a complete Deck 5 evacuation? Transcendence for at least one species through publicity and possibly financial support for a war declaration. While slicing onions, which somehow ended up being categorized as a Class 3, I kept this in mind. When Lakata wanted to wager, his figure rippled with, I looked at him in amusement, and I bet everything would work out just fine. You Yats, obsessive shockingly optimistic, are shockingly optimistic despite the fact that I've known you about every potential problem and every potential solution. You need something to make our kitchen better, because it has already gone awry. I checked my spice rack, converted weapons chest, the small army of safety sensors, and the industrial-grade warning signs, you know what. Naturally, neither of us had included the space pirates when calculating those chances. But that's getting ahead of the narrative. The demonstration supper started out with a little explosion, just like you would anticipate. I yelled over the shrieking alarms, just garlic bread as the butter sizzled. Everything is fine with 3 independent safety procedures. As I traveled, I considered the many possibilities that could lead to a breach and the release of, I said bluntly, fancy toast with more volatile chemical components than ordinary toast. The assembly's dignitaries, safety officers, and other significant individuals as I plated the first entree. Each table setting had more people watching anxiously from behind their own for Field's ocean labels compared to an airlock in a spacecraft, and emergency neutralization had been given to everyone. Ambassador Blah officially declared that the human preparation known as garlic bread, which consists of tablets, is a traditional Earth. I ignored his diplomatic approach because of the thoughtful use of plant-based flavoring chemicals in the appetizer. Spiel was concentrating on timing the soup course precisely, and the kitchen sensors were already going crazy from diabetes. If the broth's herb and spice mixture continued at this pace, we would trigger all of the station's alarms before we got the first person to try the garlic bread was Lady Crystal, whose crystalline form vibrated with whether it was fear or exhilaration. The use of heat has changed these basic carbs, I muttered. Is she okay? Into the taste compounds and texture. You rippled as she blurred the experience and uploaded it to the Silicon Consciousness Collective. The soup course went surprisingly well, and I believe you just blew several million artificial minds. When I persuaded everyone that steam was not a chemical but rather a typical aspect of offering General Zara of the weapon deployment system a resting of himself, it saved the effort of half a dozen of my researchers, commenting after 5 minutes, but was not rescued up while eating. But things took a turn for the worse when preparing the main course. The general alarm at the station began to sound, not the typical one that sounds when someone is cooking with spices, but the serious one that sounds when someone is smuggling dangerous food, one of my vehicles, into the country. Seeing that warning stamped on the boat included alarm that I intended to burn the station Brando's data, I then boldly climbed out of my cabin and left the door unlocked. Aboard the Checkmin tikka masala is categorized as a Class 4 prohibited substance, actually space pirates. According to several station security reports, Tenny and Ziga's boarding parties were twitching wildly while she conferred emergency channels. They are aiming for the food court and the business sector. While I was still working on my plating, I insisted that these garnishes not be wasted when space pirates raided a food court. The blur's form has darkened to a worried GR grill after learning of a cache of Class 7 banned chemicals. The kitchen doors exploded, revealing that your coffee cache was not as hidden as we believed. Open, a horde of grizzled aliens charged in, escorted by a huge beast. According to the leader's voice, that appeared to be composed solely of scar tissue and a negative attitude seemed like pebbles in a waste disposal. Give them all your prohibited stuff and they won't understand. I looked at the tikka masala meal and the smell burns my respiratory system. Just by being close to it, one of the pirates retreated. Captain Kaka shouldn't keep quiet since the captain strode forward, narrowing his eyes at my spies rack. Proving that the rumors are accurate, I said. For what reason? The person who keeps an illegal chemical weapons cache rack is a spice rack. Surrender your weapons cache. Pulled out something for what seemed like the 1,000th time. I glanced at my almost completed dinner set at the scene, which distressingly resembled a disintegrating arrangement. Diplomats flinching behind their force barriers as Ambassador Blue performed the gelatinous facepalm. You want to test some human weapons? I took up the appetizer platter that I had been putting away for dessert platter here with the jalapeno popper, and what would come next would be referred to as a culinary intervention in official publications. But unauthorized reports? It turns out that space pirates are guilty of a war crime with cheese. They have little tolerance for capsaicin, despite their intimidating weapons and aggressive words. The first pirate bit into a popper and received a mouthful of technology instead of the exotic technology he had anticipated. The effect of the breaded, cheese-filled, deep-fried pepper was instantaneous and funny. He lowered his weapon in front of my face, all 4 hands gripping his mouth. I rolled my eyes, disintegrating my face. Don't be theatrical. It's hardly spicy. However, his response was sufficient to divert the attention of the others, and I was able to seize my reliable cast iron skillet at this point. Ambassador, may God bless him, began swinging after being formally designated as a blunt weapon in 3 solar systems. Lady crystallized, contributed by throwing soup at the pirates with unexpected accuracy, while Gelatinous Heart joined in by broadcasting the pirates' appalled responses to the full Silicon consciousness, which immediately made them the coup de grace. The digital community's laughingstock appeared when General Zor reportedly discovered the tikka masala was seized and thrown at Captain by someone with a spine and a tolerance for spicy food. It comes out that CAC, the pirate leader, struck all three fates directly. It's not a fun reality that CAC species are especially susceptible to turmeric. Their natural defense response is to release a cloud of Zik spores. It's a fun fact that those spores have an interesting reaction. With garlic bread, the ensuing confusion cleaned the deck, emergency decontamination area, as well as the kitchen. Force fields appeared everywhere as protocols were triggered, and the pirates fled in terror, abandoning their weapons, and a number of vehement objections to the Geneva Convention while the emergency ventilation systems attempted to clear the air. I looked about my kitchen for most of dinner. The service had fared well. I informed the astonished group of dignitaries who were wondering who's ready for dessert as they emerged from behind their force fields. 3 distinct species passed out on the moderate substance, possibly some ginger cake. View the official report on the events at Morrison's Earth from the Galactic Food Safety Administration. Eats is precisely 2947 pages long, including the executive summary, yet is extremely succinct. And although human cooking habits continue to pose a risk to public safety, it is impossible to overlook proven effectiveness in station defense when reclassifying from possible interruptions. It is advised to take a cooking lesson on biochemical hazards to restricted substances. The unofficial amendment was reportedly added by ZTITX herself with the proper warning labels: "Can't stand the heat, stay out of people's kitchens." But I still have my restaurant, which now has even additional warning signs, include a large adverse effects, including but not limited to impulsive emotional reactions, transient sensory overload, and enlightenment and taste addiction that has really increased the number of customers. The My Coffee supply is now formally listed as a strategic asset, and the spice rack is more secure than the majority of bank vaults. I'm fairly certain that my cultural resource status makes me a coffee warlord. But the actual victory we initiated was a revolution, but the documentation is too hard to determine my exact title. Understood that the publication of the highly regarded document, Voluntary Chemical Warfare Understanding, by Ambassador Blair, Human Culinary Bravery, was made a required text for xenobiology classes around the galaxy, followed by the Andromedan Detente. The Human Food Challenge became a social media trend that was established by teens who survived the Sriracha event, the galaxy, where creatures of all kinds record themselves attempting to eat Earth food. The majority of these videos end in emergency tears. Sometimes all 3 of the silicon consciousness medical procedures or religious experiences come together. Serrated an entire department devoted to mimicking human taste perceptions that they have yet to understand. Even the Vexa military joined in on their insane quantum processes. And I have solid authority that General Zor can include curry tolerance in their special forces training. Manage Vindaloo now, even though he still occasionally sobs about the space pirates who never returned. But there is a backstory discussing a horrible human weapon that burns your soul and causes you to see across time in the criminal underbelly. By delivering a case of G pepper sauce to a few key black markets, I might have helped spread that rumor. Unexpectedly, other animals began attempting to learn how to prepare human food, which is why I'm standing in I'm watching a young Zentan in my kitchen, trying really hard not to faint while remembering to tell her that tears are normal since they indicate that you're doing it correctly while slicing an onion. But I don't even have, as she dices, she argues. All 3 hands wearing safety gloves. Wait till we reach Garlic Ambassador Blore, who currently serves in an unofficial capacity as my from his typical position behind the counter. The restaurant's cultural counselor laughs and says, "There's a I added some black pepper to the betting pool to see if your first alien apprentice would actually make it through the training into a sauce. Disregarding the warning clack signs, what are the chances? He smugly ripples out the majority of cash fees. The funds are on her to graduate and operate the first restaurant in the area that the diplomats have created, that is run by aliens. I really enjoy your food, but maybe addiction would be a better term. Observe my apprentice transition from onions to bell peppers, overcoming her first fear to fascination. A line of patrons waits patiently on the other side of the kitchen window, each with their own signed liability waivers, personal hazmat equipment, warning signs, and a spice rack that hums safely, and I am fairly certain that Zix is having a breakdown over my most recent menu someplace in the station, and it's the containment field. Furthermore, the amusing thing is that I say to Blur, when I formally placed an order for thermonuclear wings, in 7 sectors, the weapon system was deemed low yield, and people spent thousands of alien parts on the prototypes. Nobody ever anticipated that we would have to learn to eat alien food after years of assuming we would make first contact. Speaking of exotic blop, they ended up having the exotic cuisine gestures toward my coffee machine, which I guess now needs 3 different security clearances to work for diplomatic reasons. Would you be willing to give up a little sample of your Class 7 stimulant? Of course, blobs are. His form becomes somewhat iridescent, the gelatinous equivalent of an innocent person as you attempt to score coffee once more. If I just make the suggestion that some trade talks may run more smoothly if the parties involved were having been appropriately culturally upgraded. I take a look at the new security cameras, followed by my apprentice, who is now frying the peppers and making a commendable job of not blowing up, and at last, in the line of excited clients prepared to sign their life away for a taste of human food, so why not? But first, allow me to, perhaps another day at most, teach you the human art of plausible deniability. A risky and well-known eatery in the galaxy, but if you'll pardon me, I must go prevent my apprentice from inadvertently inventing a new pepper spray. Again, some claim that people are insane for consuming the foods we do, but I say the rest of the galaxy simply needs to add some spice to their life. But perhaps we won't introduce them to wasabi just yet. Allow them to work up to it for a few more cycles.